Welcome to Public Space, a community dedicated to supporting individuals who have experienced religious trauma or find themselves in between and are looking for self-God as well as community. We exist beyond the four walls of colonized religion. Here, we create a safe and vibrant space where members can explore and share spirituality, stories, art, and intellectual inquiry through critical dialogue. Join us as we embark on a journey of healing, self-discovery, and creative expression. Together, we will foster a supportive community that empowers individuals to reclaim their voice, embrace their unique journeys, embody a Path-Maker archetype, and find solace and strength in the company of like-minded individuals.
All right, welcome back, Path Makers, to another gathering. We made it through another full moon cycle. It's June. This full moon is going to be under this Sagittarius, we believe. Yes, Sagittarius. And so with the Sagittarius energy this month, that is a fire sign. So it's associated with adventure, higher learning, philosophy, spiritual exploration, truth, freedom, and optimism. Its ruling planet is Jupiter, emphasizing expansion, luck, and growth. So here we are in June, and today, this theme this month, today, we chose to go with freedom to wander. And that was because it was inspired based off of the full moon in Sagittarius, which will take place June 11th. For anyone wondering, no matter where you are in the world, this is happening and affecting you. So this time is really focused on perhaps expansion beyond boundaries. Um, just think of Sagittarius archetypically as this adventurous child that loves to go beyond the boundaries that their parents have set, even the boundaries that society has set. So anyone who has Sagittarius energy in them or is a primary ruling Sagittarius, they know what we're talking about because they've always had this very rambunctious, very adventurous attitude or energy. And they're very curious, you know? And so this pushes us to maybe play with that kind of energy, be more curious during this moon cycle. Um, look into things maybe you've been thinking about. Now's the time, you know? Be curious, don't be afraid so much. It's easy to live in a life of fear, and we create boundaries based on fear a lot of times. But with this kind of energy from Jupiter, and Sagittarius, it's safe to try things that are different, you know. And so this is really relating to a lot of our community members who are transitioning from traditional religion, colonized religion, and they are trying to explore a deeper connection for themselves with God, directly. And that may look like a certain kind of form of spirituality, maybe a certain kind of form of interdisciplinary practice, um, or methodologies and rituals. So, public space really has room for that kind of stuff. And so that's why we're talking about it. And we're trying to remind people that it is okay to go off the beaten path, the main path that everybody's been on for so long. We're always encouraging people to go off path. And so this month is really just a highlight of that. And the universe is giving us this energy to go off path, so to speak, and try new things, eat new things, feel new things, even look deep within ourselves as well, introspectively, and ask ourselves, has that little inner child spoken up enough? You know, for me, it would be like, my little Aaron, has their voice been heard, or are they still experiencing a cycle of our mother telling us, be silent and just stand there? And so we come from that, where that repetitive nature and relationship in a complicated way reinforce these things, where little Aaron was afraid to speak up. That throat chakra definitely was blocked, the ability to speak up for oneself, you know. And so that's just an example, of what maybe a lot of us might be going through, where we have to look inward and deal with things, or start to come to terms with things that have been affecting us since our childhood. It usually does start there. That's what we've come to learn thus far. Um, and it's not meant to be a fix all, but it's meant to be a starting point. You know, public space tends to be that launching pad where we kind of just from here go to our starting points, which usually is the conception of trauma that takes place when we're children. Those initial relationships, those initial engagements with life, and structures and rules and boundaries. And now we're trying to figure out, how do we reimagine these things and for ourselves? How do we step beyond these boundaries that have been built for us, not by us, if that makes any sense? We are seeing these things even politically, around the world. Different leaders, different countries, different nations, but are all going through similar reconstruction, similar reflections. And maybe this thing wasn't working or isn't working, and we need to transition to something that can work or will work. Um, Again, these are micro to macro, so however it resonates with you. But with all that said, Jasenia, welcome back. How have you been? Um, and please share with us, perhaps a time recently or in the past that you have gone off path. And did you see any results with that? Or was it like negative? Was it a bad experience? Or did it bring something good for you? I think that would be very helpful for the community.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think for me, I have felt rejection when I first came across, I guess, like the excitement of learning about different ways to deal with my own traumas and how to heal and things like that. And then how at the time, being a bit more creative, more open, more comfortable with myself, like expressing my feelings, to then share these thoughts with others who may not have been on the same path, but in a way sort of entertained the idea. And so basically making it look like they were, I guess, like into it. And then to me, that reflected back as, oh, this is some kind of like praise or something, or confirmation that I'm doing the right thing. But then the more that I shared, I started to get criticized, or sort of like it became, I wouldn't say like a joke, but sarcasm started to come up. And then for me, like that brought back feelings of this fight or flight response to things. And then at first, like it was a very positive experience because I felt like, oh, I came across something that I wasn't aware of before. And then having these traumatic experiences, I guess, in childhood, and sort of clinging on to other people's affirmations and acceptance and things like that, like reliving these things, it kind of made me feel abandoned again. And so I think there was like a time where like this excitement made me want to continue to work, and then it kind of halted whatever it is that I was looking forward to. And then I started to re-question again, like friendships, relationships, within like family and things like that. And it almost made me feel like, like anywhere I turn to, it seems like it's an issue for me to explore myself. And I'm feeling comfortable in this change, but no one else seemed to want to kind of like accept this change or see me in a different light. And so seeing this and understanding it from the lens of just looking outwardly and not so focused, like, and it's not an issue, but to the content or context, that now I understand that it has nothing to do with me. And so at the time I thought it was against me, like, oh, I'm not doing the right thing. I shouldn't be doing this. I left my, I guess you can say, like, the way I saw myself, my identity, I left it to others to decide for me basically what I need to do for myself. That even as an adult, you could experience these things. And so if you've been battling left and right with who you are, especially in the world that we live in that is constantly changing, but at the same time is repeating old habits. And so these old habits, it's like, okay, this is a repetitive like list of expectations, so to speak. And so I'm not fitting this norm. And if I'm not fitting this norm, then I am absolutely not on the right track. I'm supposed to be doing what everyone else is doing in order to feel accepted, in order to feel like this authenticity, this sort of love. And so I was looking at it more very like unrealistic, like especially for me, like from my own experience, from my own perspective. And then now, a few years later, because time does fly, it's like I'm regaining this focus again. It's almost as if I either upgraded my software or bought myself a new camera where I can see more vividly through my life's experience and not really caring what anyone else thinks about me. Because I don't think that should be the only the only way that we're able to just experience life. I think that just anchors us to more hurt, more trauma. And it's hard, especially in the context of social media and maybe the idols and things that are more popular. And it's interesting because before I had, or I was having these thoughts, and I've always questioned myself or went back and forth with these scenarios of people asking, oh, she's really an artist. Like, why does she call herself an artist? And then I'm responding to that in my head. And I'm like, I think there is a fascination of the word famous in it. And so I am an artist. I'm not a famous artist. And I don't think that is something that I want to aspire to become. I just want to be. I want to create from a place where I don't want a guaranteed audience. You know, like there is no just I create and then I want all your attention, you know, just it's all about me kind of thing. No, like when I do create, and that can even be through writing and things like that, where it's coming from me at the moment or just connections I've made with either my past or what I'm seeing now, and just like a mix of things. So,
It's powerful, powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That that got me thinking about a few things too. But the thing you said that really stood out to me, that would be a great reminder for our community of path makers, is that we don't have to do it the way status quo said it should be done. And we love that you said such a deep yet complicated thing, right? This famous notion, right? Like eh, this is definitely associated with colonization, right? It's a fragment of it, a piece of it, because the moment we try to aspire as human beings to this archetype, this way of thinking, this set of beliefs, it then becomes, this process of colonization where you are stepping further and further away from who you really are because you're being guilted. And we love that you brought that up. Like society and structures and authorities love to do this. They play on this guilt, right? And then we as the common people, the poor people, we sit here and say, this is how it's supposed to be. I don't want to be the mess up. So, let's keep this thing going. You know what I mean? And very briefly, we can see this as an example, right? In a religious trauma example. When people are religious, dealing with their own inner religious traumas, but they show up to the physical place that the trauma was beginning at, or conceptualize that, like you can't heal where you were hurt. You know what I mean? It's really just that simple, in simplest terms. You cannot heal yourself in the place in which you were hurt. That place can be not just a physical place, but a mental place, so like this community exists digitally, but it really exists spiritually and psychologically because it's a set of beliefs that people are agreeing to believe in that makes them part of this community. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not like you purchase a membership here or you show up at a physical place. Yeah, this is just all about you. Like what do you believe? How are you healing? What are you thinking about? And public space as a community just offers these um initial thinking points, right? Saying, have you thought about this? Maybe God doesn't hate you. Maybe God loves you still, and because when we come from the trauma, it tells us things like, you know, God does not approve. And that really haunts us as a person, as a creation of God, right? No matter what religion or what country or culture, we're all experiencing this very similar thing where our relationship with the most high, the divine, the cosmos itself, is unstable, has been tampered with, you know? And so when a middleman, theopoetically steps in and says, hey, you got to go through me to get to God, that's when we start to see fabrications and versions of religion all around the world. And it's not just that simple. I'm explaining it in a very simple way, but it's very complex because you add in culture, gender, history, geographical location, weather, even, all these things play a part into how a religion comes about. The climate, the area, all these things play a part. And so it's complicated, yes, but at the same time, we're taking on things that are not naturally ours. And that's what we're trying to get at. And I think that's what you were bringing up too, to shed light on. And in this energy of Sagittarius, it's only right that we step away from these things for a moment, temporarily, to say, hold on, maybe there's some other stuff we need to consider, you know? Um, Maybe we shouldn't consider trying to, work so hard to become famous. Maybe we should consider just being ourselves. Like that's what we heard when you were speaking, which is powerful, right? That is what we do as path makers, right? We walk our own path, the unfollowable path, meaning no one is meant or should be following your unique path, you know? And that plays into this whole famous thing. For me to become famous, my path will not be unique or unfollowable. Instead, it has become this: if you purchase this, for X amount and 99 cents, you will have the ability to go down a path that has already been laid out for you that takes you to success. We have these pyramid Ponzi schemes that have been affecting how we even climb out of the depressions and holes that we find ourselves in, right? Did you have any thoughts just saying?
And it's like, to add to this conversation, we then are being, in a way, forced to follow an unfollow path because it's someone else's unique path. And so when we continue to mimic or just uprightly just copy someone else's path or life, you're always going to feel empty in the other side. You're just, it's like when someone is, well, there's different kinds of learners or people that have different learning styles or the way they study and things like that. I'm not saying is right or wrong, but that not applying the critical thinking aspect of it, and you're just, I'm trying to think of a word. I've been using it so many times. Um, basically, regurgitating. There you go. So when we're regurgitating information and things like this, you're also regurgitating someone else's, I guess you could say, blueprint on how to live life. But then when you were practicing this way of living, you're gonna find yourself in a place where you're gonna continue questioning, is this enough? Is this enough? And then it becomes, am I enough? Because now you're meeting someone else's standards. Maybe that person applies certain standards to themselves, their own expectations, but it doesn't necessarily align with someone else's. And I think that is the missing piece that we're missing. For many of us that are so hard on ourselves, we're trying to mimic just face value everything. This imprint, the uniqueness, you cannot copy that. You cannot replace that. And that's why it is only unique to that being, to that individual. But yes, there are certain things that you can basically learn more about. If something inspires you from the person, okay, that's fine. You can yourself look more into those things. But for you to just replicate yourself into someone else, I think that's impossible. And I think that is also, there's something psychologically wrong that needs to be further, I guess, professionally looked into or something like that. But if you get what I'm trying to say, like, I don't think that is the standard. And to add to that, I don't think there is a standard. Like, here we are, year 2025, and we're still following so many old laws that swept into or creeped into people's values. And so they take those things. And then it was something that you were talking about in the introduction of today's public space that I just held on to. And I'm asking myself, is it possible for parents to pass down, or just whoever it is, caregivers, those primary relationships, and even certain systems, like maybe education and stuff like that, that there is the fight or flight response that may have been passed down to other people based on fear? So then we take these fears, which are the fight or flight responses, that people are creating their own values, their own systems, their own frameworks of how you're supposed to, quote unquote, live a decent life. And so, like, that, I was, like, that really made me think about that. Like, it's not something obviously that you inherit. I'm not saying that, but like, it's not in your DNA, like other things that are claimed to be part of the DNA, which I don't agree, and that's another conversation. But how the fight or flight response can be passed down to others through generations, through teaching, education and things like that. And then people are not aware that this is what they're doing. And so I think this is why it's so crucial to just question life, question why people believe maybe the pencil that we're holding is real, things, why they're telling us that this is what it is, and not really look into it yourself, make your own conclusions. And I think no matter what age, like, because I think there's this sense of curiosity that goes beyond a child's eyes. It's something that we have to, and we must, as human beings, continue to feed. Because, and I know we've had several conversations before, but thinking about indigenous cultures, right? And let's say, for example, how historically we learned about Native Americans, or how some of us choose American Indians, how they lived in teepees. And so some people would say, oh, that is so primitive. How can they live like that and things, But then you think about, well, what if they're just migrating people? Like, you can't just pack up your brick house. That's impossible. And so, like, it's like these things, we have accepted certain beliefs for it to be true. And then these things become identities, become a part of us. They become traditions, part of the culture. And we hold on to it like so hard that it's so difficult to allow new ideas and to basically share other people's perspectives and things. Like, we're still in a place where we just cannot gather and just, okay, that was the experience in history, but this is where we can come together now, having understanding of certain things. But I guess I don't want to take this somewhere else. But just like this idea that we have to question our lives, we have to question why things are the way they are, why they do not work in certain systems in societies overall, in the human experience. Why do we continue to support these things?
Hey, everybody. This is Dr. Waldron. Just want to take this moment to welcome you again to Public Space and remind you of how this community is dedicated to supporting individuals like you and me who have experienced religious trauma or find themselves in between or looking for self or God, as well as community. We exist beyond the four walls of colonized religion. Here, we create a safe and vibrant space where members can explore and share spirituality, stories, art, and intellectual inquiry. Join our newsletter. That way you can stay up to date on the journey of healing, self-discovery, and creative expression. Together, we'll foster a supportive community that empowers individuals to reclaim their voice, embracing their unique journeys, and find solace and strength in the company of like-minded individuals. Yeah, I mean, you raise a lot of good points. Um, and you also raised a lot of good educational points too, learning points. Um, One thing that you brought up was interesting to me is when we were talking about, this colonization event that takes place and how they make us think that, you know, our beliefs are not valid and that we're primitive and we should, adopt more advanced methods and beliefs and whatnot. This same when you said that, there was like an echo in my mind, right? And we thought of Columbus approaching and landing here on this continent, um, and his engagement with Tainos, right? Um, that's one example of what happens when this colonizing idea or set of beliefs spreads, right? And we keep hearing you say, why is this happening? Why do we keep doing these things? Why do we feed this, right? This monster, right? Or this engine? Why do we fuel it, right? And honestly, that's an unfair question. We've come to understand and learn for ourselves. That's an unfair inquiry because once you go down that path of why, you'll never be fulfilled because the why will never be enough for you. Because a lot of times the why is so empty, so surface level, so filled with nothing. It comes from like an angry, delusional space, right? And you'd be like, why? And when you're asking why, you're expecting a logical response. A lot of us expect that shit, like a logical response, like, why did you do this? Explain this to me. And it's unfair because you're asking a crazy person to explain their craziness to you, if that makes any sense. So when we started to see it this way, we're like, why are we asking crazy people why they crazy? That's just going nowhere, right? Why is the wall not talking back to me? Why? Why is God not speaking to me? Like it keeps going on and on. And in the background, there's an underlying physical, materialistic desire, right? Let's just be real. right? When we say, I want this response, I want an action,
Mhm.
right? Why do I not have justice? I want an action. I want to see this in real time in my lifetime right now. Like, and a lot of times the way God works through history, we see God doesn't work on our time. The universe doesn't work on our time. We're a flea on the back of God, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Like wherever God is going, we're on the ride. You know what I mean? Like we don't have real control over the direction in which the universe is going. When you think about it, we are a very tiny, minuscule thing in the grand scheme of it all. But it's so beautiful that even though we're so minuscule and microscopic in the scale of everything, in the context of everything, we're still important because God incredibly created things and all things with such detail and and focus, right? And thinking about things ahead of things and ahead of things that think about ahead of things, if that makes any sense. When we look at our bodies, right? We say, damn, how does the body do this? We're so amazed at what God has created. When we dissect animals to study, wow, what thing could create this thing in such beautiful detail at its scale? You dissect a spider, an ant. Like how does an ant be able to lift 10 times its weight? Like these are small things, but yet they're still important and they have been given detail in their creation. Nothing was left out without thought. God wasn't like, yeah, let me just do this because I'm tired. It's like, no, the universe created all things with a sense of knowing, some sense of knowing, right? We can all agree on like, why would God give you lungs if God didn't know that you needed to breathe some sort of air or you needed a mechanism in your body to turn certain harmful gas into breathable air? Let's be real, right? Like, I can go on and on, but the point here is that, you know, we're all important, we're all beautiful, but none of us should think that we have the authority or the power to tell another or a group of others that were created by God too. That's TOO also, that somehow I become the middleman and tell them my interpretations of God and tell them that this is the standard. This is what God wants. This is what God wants for everybody. This is what God wants you to do. And it's like, but if God is so incredibly powerful, come on, bear with me on this. How is it that God would not communicate with you directly? Oh, wait, God does through dreams, through intuition. Come on, man. Like these things are happening all the time. Yet we still believe we need to go through people to get some sort of divine message. God is talking directly to all of us all the time in a very fascinating language. If you really think about it, it's not just in dreams, but God speaks in symbols, sound, feeling. Like there's dimensions of God's language, you know? And we think that our languages were sent by God. These are man made. We created it, inspired by what God has created, you know? And that is a beautiful notion that you brought up too when you were talking about how, a lot of us are struggling because we've been put in this fight or flight, a very traumatic response, right? And that traumatic response, we do believe can be inherited, like you're saying. Because when you look at it in practical terms, especially here in the US, and of course, all over the world in different locations, we inherit poverty. And you ask yourself, how did I inherit this? I was born, and then as a child, I'm just brought into this. I have no choice in this matter. It's just your parents were poor, so you're poor. And it's like this echo, right? This ripple of poverty. And it comes from these major traumatic events when some group of people comes to another location and tries to flex their authority and their imaginations as superior, and then tell the indigenous locals there everything you've been doing is wrong. You need to relearn everything. And then this makes you subordinate to me because I know everything that you have to learn. You know what I mean? Like you feel this disadvantage there. And it's like, I can't use anything that I've already have. I have to start all over. And weirdly enough, 2025, this feels like this year is going through this. Like we are going through major changes, and it feels like we have to start again, so to speak. Right? Like we see the money situation all around the world. Global economies are failing, and people are wondering why. And we're going through these micro to macro transitions right now. It's affecting us all. It don't matter if you believe in X or believe in Y. Like we're being affected by these larger patterns, and these larger patterns are trying to tell us people that we need to funnel into these lines, and we need to exist and live in these boxes, theopoetically speaking. I mean, at this point, some parts of the world, some people can say, yeah, we living in real literal boxes, you know, but it's just crazy, when we talk about freedom, this concept of freedom is long gone. We don't have it. It's not here. We're all experiencing some form of oppression and slavery at a very high level. And they're dressing it up with things, you know? And because we come from poverty spaces, poor spaces where it lacks information, it lacks love, it lacks wholesome energy and healing, please.
I would add to that the word poor. I mean, that has also been injected with the status quo because at the same time, there may be poor individuals or families that they'll say, I will never exchange my life to your life. That you may not be poor, you're living a very comfortable life, but I'm actually rich spiritually and things like that, which yes, there is that other side where people are economically strained and things like that. But I would say that certain words have been injected with this higher um hierarchy, this what they call the higher class, where people are trying to climb up towards to, and um not realizing that they're putting themselves into a deeper debt, not just money wise, but again, like spiritually, mentally, all these things. Yeah, I just wanted to add that. So it's just like so fascinating, like talking about this. It makes me think about so many different things. Like the possibility is just endless, even though we may be stuck on what is happening in the world, the current events. I could just imagine those that walked the earth at one point and were in the same kind of this mindset of questioning, like, all these things are happening, like, why are we even here, like, what can I do, or these things are limiting me to not move forward, but what can I do individually?
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. But even on that note of questioning, um, we were talking about before about being careful about getting stuck into those cycles of questioning because you can easily become addicted to asking why. And why doesn't lead to action, believe it or not. As much as people may want to believe, why does not lead to action. It just leads to more why
Yeah.
because you're not satisfied. Like, and you can look at this in anyone's life, in anyone's scenarios, like in life experiences. When someone hurt you and you asked why, did you feel fulfilled when you got that response? Maybe the response was, I don't know. Did that satisfy you? So what the fuck does why get you? You know what I mean? Like, it just keeps you in a cycle of asking, the same question. Like, you're not healing when you ask why, and funny enough, why should lead to answers, but it doesn't. Instead, when we start to empathize, instead of asking why, you're now searching as to how something came about, not why, but how, right? So, for example, let's say somebody experienced childhood trauma, right? And let's say it was physical, like sexual trauma or something, right? Molestation or something. And the person who experienced it may start out in a traumatic state saying, why? Why did this happen to me? Was it something I did wrong? Was it something I wore? Is it something I said? You see this cycle of why. But then let's say they go through therapy and somehow one day through a therapy session, they come into a place of thinking, instead of why, how? How did this come about? Who attacked me? And then and then start thinking, well, this person attacked me, but was this person attacked? Because we also start to see these patterns. People don't just get up and traumatize people. People traumatize people who've been traumatized. Hurt people, right? That's the motto, that's the saying. And so we see this from micro to macro. People are not evil or good. This is a firm belief we've come to understand, and it's very helpful, we think. People are not good or evil. However, their choices have the capability of being perceived as good or evil because of context. You know, a simple example of what we're talking about, you could go to the zoo and watch the lions and tigers safely, through that thick glass, right? In their contained area, controlled environment, right? And you feel safe. You're having fun at the zoo watching these tigers and lions in this controlled environment. So now the lion or tiger to you is not dangerous. This is fun. This is magical, even. This is awesome. I'm having a great time, right? Then you have a different experience. You're in the wild, and there is no controlled environment. This is a natural environment. There is no barricade, there's no boundaries, there is no thick glass between you and this animal. Now, how do you feel about this animal? Do you still feel happy, safe? No, you feel like you're in danger, that it probably is upset and wants you out of its territory, and you shouldn't be there, right? So, in both examples, the only thing that changed was this concept or idea of you're safe and protected, and this thing won't harm you. So, again, this all goes back to perceptions, how we view things in its context determines, or we create this value of good and evil, you know but it's hard to navigate these thoughts when when you're thinking through religious structures, like say Christianity, for example, and how it's infamous for telling stories and perpetuating beliefs of, like the devil, Lucifer, this figure or being that is the epitome of evil and is responsible for evil things. I'm not saying that's wrong or right, because we also understand too, when we start to explore multi-faith, that Lucifer, the devil, is just, again, an archetypical symbol, right? It's our shadow, it's us, that we've projected into myths, into stories, to help share ideas, you know and this is why no information should be taken literal. And when you have a bunch of literal
Mm.
people who are, trying to tell you, well, this is how it should be, this is how you should believe, it doesn't leave room for you to interpret it based on your cosmic connection with the universe. You know what I mean? So your intuition is usually the indicator of, okay, is this something that we resonate with, or is this not for us? You know what I mean? So you really don't need someone outside you to tell you what's good and bad for you when you think about it. Now, yes, again, literal people will say, but yeah, but what about your parents? Yes, you need your parents. Yes. But what we're saying here is not meant to be literal, because nothing's meant to be literal, or interpreted literally. But what we're saying here is that you don't need a middleman. And we're a firm believer of that. You can really navigate this cosmos with you and your connection, inside. That intuition is your bridge to the cosmos of knowing all things, having access to all things that exist, all energy that exists. But you're cut off when you give that power to some middleman that swears they're going to sell you a refrigerator or a microwave of an idea, telling you this is better, this is faster, this is easier, and telling you that the old way is the word. And we see this throughout society and humanity, like we're fighting over what's still good. And it turns out things from ancient times are still good. They still work. But we've been sold ideas that we need to adopt Wi-Fi and live in skyscrapers and drive cars that are charged on ports, and we're sold these ideas that this is advancements in society, that we're going forward, but we start to see maybe we're not going forward. Maybe we're actually staying either in place or going backwards, and we're losing ourselves in the process. You know what I mean?
Hmm. I was hoping you know, went into more of the childhood kind of experience, but I loved how you chose how instead of why. And so the how does build that empathy, because then the empathy where you can see how someone's experience, where you can place yourself in that situation and more or less how would you react with the tools that you have then, you know, were they limiting? And so when you come to that point of realizing that, which I agree with you 100%, it really does help you understand. And that's the key word, understanding. So it's within the understanding of someone else's experience and how their reactions, their choices affected you or impacted you. And when you understand that, then it's when you no longer want to repeat these things. And I think that's why it's important, why there's different ways or different spaces for people to heal, whether it's mental health practices, spiritual spaces, just anything that provides that space for people to visualize um, how they can place themselves in someone else's situation and respond. And that is how that connection and empathizing comes in. And then I don't know why, but like I can visually, put together things. So as you were talking, I don't know why, but I thought about how, for me, this is what I believe, that the devil or the devil archetype comes from patriarchal beliefs, and how creating this thing, it allows or it allowed those to continue on this sort of like egoistical kind of lifestyle, and you know um, limiting people from opening their minds and expanding and actually create their own freedoms, right? And so if we look through history, there is just a number of people that even till today, they have passed down these kind of beliefs. And so it's only as if only they can feel or experience this freedom to live while others are still enslaved. And so it's happening today. But man, this is a very uh interesting conversation and yeah, really eye-opening.
Yeah, before we close out, we just wanted to respond to what you just said. Um, and it would be awesome if other community members had their own interpretation or their own way of thinking about this. You can definitely, leave a comment. Um, but this notion that the devil archetype has been fabricated by patriarchy is very, very interesting because for me, who a person who sees a lot of things through film and understands things through film, when we watch films that are usually depicting the devil, you never see the devil as a woman. And the only real time in cinema that I've seen the devil as a woman was in two films. And it may be because of my limited experience. So again, if anyone else has any other experiences, please leave a comment. Um, but we saw with Denzel Washington, A Devil in a Blue Dress. That was a cool movie. It's an old movie, but in that film, this white woman was depicted as the devil in a blue dress. Like she was the devil to Denzel's character, who played this, black man during a time where segregation was high and racism was even higher. She was messing around with him, and that was a very devilish thing to do in the film. And then there's another film which was more on the comical side, Bedazzled. I don't know if you remember that one. She played, the devil plays this woman, this sexy woman who's enticing and flirting with this character man who basically has been single. He's like a nerd. It's hard for him to, date women or be. And so the devil comes into his life and grants him these wishes and stuff. And he learns things about himself. And it's funny, but it also is cool. But those are the only two films we've seen where the devil's depicted as a feminine, you know. Everywhere else, it's masculine. And that's interesting. Like even, when they're depicting God and the devil as two men, and it's just really interesting that you brought up something that I think a lot of us can resonate with, and it's maybe triggering for some too. Um but yeah, that's interesting because then I'm thinking now, if patriarchy keeps alive this idea of the devil, what happens when we step out of it? Especially in the spirit of, becoming free to wander, this month under the Sagittarius moon. What happens if we, creatively, hypothetically, theopoetically step back from patriarchy? What then would that archetype or that figure look like? Would it take on the feminine role, or would it be
Mhm.
something
Mhm.
different? You know what I mean? Like what role or what shape would it take? Maybe that's a better way to explain it or describe it, because what we're talking about is not a person. What we're talking about is a set of patterns, and then we creatively as humans gave it shape, as because of patriarchy, like you're saying, we gave it shape as a man, a fallen angel. That's a man. But if we step out of patriarchy, hypothetically, what does that fallen angel then take shape as? You know? And this is hard. I right now we don't even have an answer, because this is just mind blowing when you think about it, because it's trippy, because it's sort of like what came first, the chicken or the egg type scenario. Like, what's beyond that? If we're so fixated on the chicken and the egg, why are we not asking, how did the world that the chicken and the egg came into, how did that take shape? Like, we're going back, you know what I mean? When you think about it, when we're stepping away from these mega structures of belief and idea, right? For sake of argument, let's say we've been indoctrinated, me and you, in Western idealism, right? Ideas and values. What happens when we step out of that? How do we make sense of the cosmos? How do we make sense of up, down, left, right? How do we make sense of anything if all we knew was what we've been indoctrinated by? And this is really the underlying complication of decolonizing, that nobody really is talking about. You know what I mean? Like, when we say, yo, we need to decolonize ourselves, it's not just about, I don't do Starbucks anymore, or I don't just shop there anymore. Like, it becomes down to our core. What the hell are we thinking and believing that isn't ours, but has been given to us so that we respond in a certain way? This is the real crazy part to me, that these seeds of ideas are triggering us to respond and make choices in a certain manner that is predictable. And that translates to capitalism, profitable. And this is what bugs me.
Mhm.
When we sitting here talking about, we need to go off the beaten path, we need to go off path, and all this is part of that.
Mhm.
And yeah, it can seem really scary, but it's not as scary if you're with people who are like-minded. You know what I mean? Like, it just is reassuring when you're talking with someone who doesn't say, you know what, you're kind of crazy. You won't get that here. You know, you'll get a more of a response of, that's interesting. Never thought about that. Whereas in other spaces, you get that kind of reinforcement of boundary. Don't think like that. That's crazy talk. Are you okay? Do you need help? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's conformity in society that's so heavy, like, and people will say, because you're not conforming, you must be sick. Something's wrong with you. And that right there is what makes us second guess and question ourselves and say, am I fucked up? Because intuitively, I'm feeling like I'm on the right path. But around me, people are like, that's not the rules here. you know? And so, yeah, on one hand, you're trying to follow God, right? And on the other hand, you're trying to fit in. That's what it boils down to, you know? So it's crazy, I know, but we got to leave you with this cliffhanger. Do you fit in, or do you pursue God? And mind you, pursuing God translates to finding your authentic self, because that's probably as close as we get to God, you know? That's like trying to say, I want to give the sun a kiss. I don't think you'll survive it. God is this immense energy, right? Even through the physicist's perspective, God would be this epitome of gravity, if not the gravity source itself, right? That holds everything together, and everything is revolving around God, and God is, all these things keeping it together. So, like, what do you think you're getting so close to, if not yourself? That's the safest distance in which you can be to God, is to not try to see the projected face of God, but to see your face in God, and then see other faces in God. That's as close to
Mhm.
God as you could possibly get these days, man. I'm telling you, if you think that you could get closer, you will be vaporized. You will be lost. You will be destroyed. I'm telling you, people have done all kind of crazy techniques and um, um, ecstasy techniques and outer body experiences to try to get closer to what the source is. And sometimes they find themselves lost in their heads, lost, because you tried to go too far. And actually, you weren't supposed to go maybe that far. Maybe it was just God being God, so incredible, placed a doorway so close for you inside you so you don't have to space travel to find God. You could just, tap into you and be connected to God. I think that's a very, very powerful and humbling notion, but sure, a lot of people, it's going to be hard for them to digest that because, again, they're struggling with fitting in and following God. And God is not delivering messages through a man on a corner telling you to repent. And you know what I mean? No shade, but I'm just keeping it real. No matter where you are in the world, these people who swear they heard from God this message, it's like, well, if God wanted me to have that message, God would have told me too. Why would God put so much pressure on one individual to save the world? That sounds like some patriarchy shit. That sounds like some man made stuff. That sounds unrealistic, inhumane. You know what I mean? So, anyway, on that note, um, thank you everybody for tuning in, tapping in. Thank you everybody for being part of this amazing, small yet developing global community. Thank you so much for listening in and liking and subscribing. We are definitely humbled at the idea that so many people from different parts of the world are engaging with not only this platform or this community, but the projects that came out of this community, the collaborations via book, podcasts, that's really just amazing. Thank you so much. And if you want to continue to stay connected and stay up to date with what projects are coming out of this community through collaboration, join our newsletter. You'll get like weekly updates, and it'll remind you of the next current events, as well as new publishings, new podcasts, collaborations, and all that good jazz. um so yeah, on that note, keep your head up. It's crazy out there. Um, Try to get some rest. Really, for real. Like, get some rest. I'm not just talking about taking naps. Like, take a break from work. This is coming from a workaholic, right? Like, we work so hard night and day, but we have been working even harder to find pockets of rest because we need to rejuvenate. We also learned that no one's going to fill our cup. We got to fill it for ourselves because there's so many people out there asking for a sip of our cup. So we got to make sure our shit is filled before we can start offering sips. You know what I mean? And that basically just means take care of yourself before you think you could take care of anybody else. Love yourself before you can start thinking that you could love somebody else. And forgive yourself before you think you could forgive somebody else. This is the inward outward pattern. It works for mostly everything. It starts with you, and the answers are in you. If you think that you have some quarrel or some beef with somebody, you angry at this person, I hate to break it to you, but ultimately you just angry at yourself. You're just directing it at that person. So, you know, slow down, breathe, meditate, find yourself a comfortable spot to just breathe through these things, because you got to come to a point of understanding it's you. It's you. And the moment you figure that out, your engagements with other people will change. This is coming from experience. Definitely. You got to really start considering how the world is just mirroring your insides. And if you see things in the world you don't like, it's in you. And you really don't like it because you're a part of it, and it takes time to slowly start accepting that you're part of the chaos. We're not better than it. We aren't. We're part of it. And this is part of that deeper shadow work, collectively as humans, we need to be starting to work on these things. We need to start pushing ourselves to start taking action to change these things in ourselves before we can pass judgment on others outside of us. You may think that so and so needs to do this, and all your opinions and critiques, that's great. But really, if you haven't done it first or before this person, then what are you really asking for? It's unrealistic. So for me, especially as a leader, if we can't do it, we won't ask someone else to do it. And if we're not willing to do it, we definitely won't ask someone else to do it. And if we haven't done it before, we definitely won't ask for someone else to do it. You know what I mean? Like, you have to come from a place of experience so that you understand what's really fair. You know what I mean? A lot of people, they may look like adults, but they have the capacity of a child. They don't have the skills or the know-how, and that's what makes them like a child. But you're looking at a physical, full-grown adult. So we have to remember this. Sometimes we're asking too much, you know, and that's not a bad thing, but it's a point of awareness. Like, maybe we shouldn't ask for that like that. Maybe we should change how much we contribute, instead of putting it all on someone else or something like that, taking responsibility, you know. So yeah, we just wanted to share that a little tidbit, because somebody in the community probably needs to hear it, be, you know, reminded, confirmed that, you're not going crazy, but you just got to be more patient with yourself. It takes time. It really does. But yeah, on that note, path makers, we'll see you next month on the next full moon cycle. Jasenia, did you have any closing thoughts or remarks for the path makers in the community?
I would say just continue being you. Whatever your path looks like, just continue to feel comfortable, feeling that space of being comfortable.
Definitely, definitely know what you mean there. That's a good one. All right. We'll see you next month.